You have just tuned into Black, Bipolar, and Badass, Episode 2, Thriving Through Trauma. But before we begin, I want to introduce you to one of the best voices of our generation, poet, educator, badass performer, Gabriel Ramirez.
Hi everyone. Um, so I just want to thank you all for being here, and yeah, just really excited. um, the Golden Herringbone after Gwendolyn Brooks. Choosing life shouldn't have to be a choice. I don't know what has hurt you, and I assure you, life can be sweeter than it's been to you. When you aren't sweet to yourself, death hasn't come, but will feel closer and will feed on your stillness. Burn sage and wait. Today doesn't want your last breath. Death wants you tender from your mistakes, has dreamed of your wrinkled face with a smile stretching over all you've survived. Lot turned garden, turned home, a life of your favorite music, muscles moving like time, natural, unstoppable, graceful. Death, at times, is kept away by miracles. You can be and are the miracle you need. Attend to your needs like someone who loves you, to become someone who loves you. Today, you deserve to enjoy and enjoy again tomorrow. Thank you.
I am so full always and all of the time. Thank you so much, Gabe. I do appreciate you. So I haven't introduced myself to you yet, and I am Kymani Mocha Jade. I'll be the host for the evening, but I'm not alone. With me are my co-hosts, Emuche, Nwaigwe,
Hello, hello.
Love, and Victor Sawyer, who will be our moderator for this evening. So Victor, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for episode 2 of Black, Bipolar, and Badass. As was just mentioned, my name is Victor Sawyer. I'm a music teaching artist and trombonist based in Memphis, Tennessee. And I want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to say, hey, y'all, hey. So we have Gemynii. Can we get a wave? Okay, there we go. We have Gabriel, who you just heard from. Emuche. We have Brad, Kemara,
Hi.
Kymani, once again, and Pojani or PJ. Okay. So as we move through this, I do want to make sure that I offer this trigger warning. Of course, we all know that bipolar disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, all of these mental health issues and disorders have a certain set of symptoms and narratives that are associated with those. They often can be quite troubling and disturbing, depending on where they go. I just want to make sure that everyone listening in today understands that the topics covered could delve into territory that's uncomfortable and that might not feel okay, it might not feel like a happy space. Feel free to leave and come back as you need to. As this is a conversation about mental health, the most important thing, of course, is all of our collective mental health. Please be aware and do what you need to do to feel comfortable in this space as we explore this topic. We will be sharing resources throughout the entire session. Why are we here? The Black, Bipolar, and Badass Collective has since expanded to include African American or Black and Brown artists beyond just bipolar disorder. And the purpose of coming together was to remember that we're not alone in this. Our first conversation was a beautiful conversation in which we shared our individual stories of mental illness and how we've gone through those. Today, we're going to focus on thriving through trauma, navigating trauma with mental health disorders. We have an illustrious group of panelists, and I'll be asking them questions and responding in a way that we get to explore that topic of how do we actually navigate a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month with bipolar, or excuse me, with various mental health issues. I would like to pass it right now to Kay, who is going to share a bit about trauma and what that actually means. Kay?
Thanks, Vic, and hello, everybody. That was great, by the way, Vic. Perfect. So I'm looking at the definition of trauma by the American Psychological Association, and according to the APA, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, a rape, or a natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical, but longer term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headache and nausea. And that's just the immediate and maybe like the medium term psychological effects that people have to deal with when experiencing trauma. If we take a expanded look and look at the statistics around trauma, 70% of adults in the United States of America have had at least one traumatic event in their life. And that's a lot of people, right? That's like 223 million people in the United States alone who are trying to, whether they know it or not, managing trauma in some way. So we're in good company, right? The other thing that you may not know is that 30% of our youth actually develop long-term symptoms from experiencing trauma, and may actually go into a PTSD diagnosis. PTSD is a condition, and it's actually a disorder in where the person who has experienced trauma is having difficulty recovering from it. And PTSD can last for months for some people. For other people, it can last for years. And for me, I've been invited to the conversation because of some comments on the last episode that we had. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which started at a very young age and was initiated by repeated trauma over and over again for a period of years. And because it happened young, I actually have to deal with PTSD symptoms for probably the rest of my life. I'll be managing those flashbacks and emotional disturbances, maybe for the rest of my life to some extent. So that's what I have here in order to share just a little bit to give us some context about how trauma affects all of us. I'm going to pass it back to Vic and open up the conversation from here.
Thank you for that. And thanks for sharing that personal aspect on that as well as we move into this conversation. As a reminder, we're not alone. 5 quick stats. 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 20 experience serious mental illness, probably leading to a hospitalization. 1 in 6 youth, as was alluded to just now by Kay, age 6 through 17, experience a mental health disorder each year. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14, and 75% by the age of 24. And once again, going back to that trigger warning, I do need to say this. Suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst people aged 10 to 34. And this is all from the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So welcome, panelists. Let's go ahead and dive in. So opening up, I know I said your first names, but I was hoping we could go around the horn, and if you could tell us where you're from, your medium, your artistic medium, and just a short blurb on why you decided to be a part of this conversation. For the sake of time, if you all don't mind, I'm just going to call on the panelists so we can keep the flow going. Brad, would you please like to start? And you are on mute.
Sorry, y'all. I'm Brad Walrond. I'm a poet, writer, performer. I reside in the Bronx. I myself have a diagnosis of major depression, and I'm honored to be part of the conversation. This is fundamental to our life and well-being.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Hey y'all, my name is Gabriel. I am originally from New York City, currently based out of Miami, Florida. And I don't know, I just feel like having experienced depression and anxiety, and having recently been diagnosed with it after several years. I feel like haven't really been able to like talk and be in community uh, in to this like scale with this like purpose and intention. So I'm just thankful to be able to share my work and you know contribute to the conversation however I can.
Thank you. Kymara?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kymara Knight. I am an artist of multiple disciplines, and the reason why I chose to join this conversation, besides wanting to support Kymani, is I've dealt with various mental illnesses for the majority of my life. Many of them resulted in hospitalizations, and my story spans from suicidality to self-harm and so on. As someone who is still in recovery from these disorders, I just feel like it's important to always have this conversation because in my history, I've seen the detriment of not having it. And we just not going to live that life anymore. It's 2021. We're going to talk about it. So glad to be here, and shout out to everybody who's here with us.
I love to see these smiles as we already dive into this topic because we're still human. So I love seeing smiles as we still talk about these things. PJ?
Good evening. I'm also here to support Kymani. But my name is Pajani Fleury. Most people call me PJ. And I'm multidisciplinary as well. But in terms of artistry, I'm a writer and an author, and I self-publish. And I decided to join the conversation because my family, I guess I would say mental health is a challenge. Um, I would say a bit on the hereditary side. So I've seen a lot of things and been exposed to a lot of things. So I'm sensitive to my own mental health. And so I often tell people around me that if you see anything, please, don't hesitate to bring it to my attention, to my family's attention. It's something that I always monitor and manage to make sure that I am in the best mental health state. So there's just something that I think is so important, that whether or not you have a diagnosis, that you have the tools to understand one mental health, and is what can keep you psychologically healthy, mentally, emotionally healthy, and what are challenges when they come about, the red flags, the warning signs. So I'm just happy to be a part of the conversation and offer my insights.
Thank you for being here. Emuche?
Hi, y'all. Thank y'all for joining us tonight. My name is Emuche Nwaigwe. I'm originally from Virginia. I've been residing in Brooklyn for a few years now. I'm a digital illustrator and aspiring filmmaker. I'm also diagnosed bipolar 1. I know I've been dealing with it for many years, diagnosed when I was about 27. But I've also seen other people in my family that struggle with mental illness. So I've just had a lot of familiarity with it growing up. I just feel that it's good to promote proper mental hygiene and good mental health practices. So I just wanted to join in any conversation that would be bringing more awareness to those subjects.
Thank you. And then Kay, although you've already spoken on it, but if you want to add.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, so the name is K Victorious Love. I'm so grateful to be a part of this collective and this opportunity to share. I am a multidisciplinary artist as well, specifically in urban styles, dance, playwriting, hip hop, emceeing, DJing. I dabble at this and that. Generally, arts that's my healing. That's how I move through this trauma. That's how I manage to be able to process my feelings without, killing people. Take that with a grain of salt, please. But you know what I'm saying, right? um, and for me, this conversation is important to have. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of it is because, literally, I think I'm the first generation in my family who actually gives mental illness and, diagnosis a label. It wasn't even anything that we talked about. You get it done. You wipe off your tears, you pull up your pants, you put on your boots, and you get the job done. You don't worry about your feelings, and I can't recover without being able to talk about this with the community, CPTSD is my issue. I come from a long line of people with PTSD, people in the military, things of that. And I can literally say that PTSD has killed my family. I'm the last of my lineage because of, the health problems that comes along with the mental part, right? So like heart attacks, diabetes, which is a lot of times exacerbated by stress, and a lot of people don't talk about the fact that people with PTSD that aren't treated might get themselves into some very dangerous behavior. So, that's why I'm here. And I'm looking forward to learning from all of you and hopefully to contribute in any way that I can. Thank you.
And then finally, our organizer, Kymani, Jade, would you like to speak on why you're here or even why you decided to really spearhead a lot of this?
Thank you, my co-organizer, Victor Sawyer. So yeah, this is definitely community work. And I thank you all for showing up. I'm here because you were here. I am deeply inspired by your art, by your personhood, what you're creating in the community. We don't always talk all the time. A like isn't enough to really explain how deeply moved I am by who you are. And that's genuine. That's genuine. So I'm just glad to be able to be in this space with you and to have this public conversation where other people can feel some of the seasoning that you bring to the pot, right? So yeah, Kymani Mocha Jade. I am a spoken word artist, a storyteller, essentially. I am from Harlem, West Harlem to be specific, by way of the Caribbean 246 stand up. And I think that's it, right? And then also we lost Gem, who will be back in a moment. She is having some technical difficulties. So when she comes back, I guess we can just give her some space to do the same. Thank you, Vic.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to move into the group discussion now. And I didn't say it, but I had bipolar 2 disorder. I was diagnosed at age 27, although I had my first symptoms at 16. So I want to, I'm in the club too. So let's dive into the questions. So a lot of us talked about being here to have a space to actually be in dialogue with this. But we also know that trauma can be a very deeply personal experience. In fact, it is. It's a deeply personal experience, at least in my opinion. But what I want to hear is when you think of the word trauma, what comes to mind? And that's a question for all of the panelists. So whoever would like to jump in, unmute, and dive in. When you think of the word trauma, what comes to mind?
I'd say sorrow and confusion are two words that instantly come to mind for me. Sorrow and confusion.
Well, when I think of trauma, I think of my most traumatic experience relatively. It had to do back in 2016 when I had art accepted into a show in Art Basel out in Miami. And that trip ended with me getting arrested for trespassing, even though I had called the police. I was in a manic episode. And the conversation with the officer ended with him saying, "Do you want me to take you to jail?" And me saying, "Take me to jail," not sarcastically, not expecting to go. But I spent 3 days in jail, and in a manic state. They gave me no medication. I was in isolation, and it was just uh, more. The word traumatic doesn't even hardly apply, but it really shook me to my core. It took me years to recover from. So just thinking about how police aren't really trained with how to deal with people dealing with mental illness, and how so many issues or so many circumstances, things can go terribly wrong. So I can at least say, at least they didn't shoot and kill me and something like that. But that's what comes to mind when I think of trauma and how I've dealt with it in my experiences with mental illness.
I'm glad you shared that personal story. Thank you for sharing that, because often these words we use, like trauma, they don't really capture the actual story, the narrative. So once again, the importance of this conversation. So thank you for sharing how that actually manifested in your life. Others, the word trauma, what do we think when we hear that word?
I'll add to that really quickly. When I think of trauma, I also think of the trauma of hospitalization. I think of psychiatric institutions as the carceral state. So I think about strip searches. I think about involuntary confinement. I think about mattresses on the floor. I think about forced injections and just the systemic violence that happens outside of the prison system, right? Psychiatric hospitals, and inside of them as well. So that's the trauma that really sits with me the most, especially dealing with my bipolar 1, that is.
Yeah. You know, going deeper into some of those questions, one thing I heard from Kay that I like that you mentioned was how trauma can last or not last. It can be temporary, it can be a little bit, or it can be a lot longer. And so, a follow up question to what the word trauma means when you hear it, and anyone can still answer that question, of course, but how have some of you grown and learned to cope with that trauma? And what does that actually mean to cope with it? So, how did you grow and learn to cope with some of your trauma across time? And that's for anyone but Kay. I know that you really led me to that question.
Yeah,
I
Vic,
think
that's
a,
fine. Oh, go ahead. My bad.
I think a big part of growing through trauma is acknowledging that you're not responsible for it. When I think of trauma, I think of things that are beyond our control, that we are compelled to experience in our lives, and we aren't always responsible for the ways it affects us. And learning to be kind to yourself in that regard, I think, is often a beginning place for healing, because we're here to work through, to integrate, to work through, to process, and all those things take time.
Thank you. Kay, you were going to jump in?
Yeah, just real quick, we were talking about what we think about when we hear the word trauma, and the first word that came to mind was pain, but then like right after pain came beauty, which is for me how I think about who we are as people for having to embrace this trauma and embrace the part, embrace ourselves even though we have to go through this trauma, and I think at the end of the day, the whole point for me is to learn how to do that in a way in which I still consider myself to be beautiful, can still love myself through it, and can still share that with other people in a way where I feel safe, because especially with PTSD, it affects your relationships and it affects your ability to share yourself. So it's a struggle to try to do that. But once it's done, even if it doesn't measure up to what everyone else thinks that it should look like, at the end of the day, it's still beautiful because it's healing.
That's a real nice positive frame, and you did mention relationships. I wanna call our attention back to two words as we move into this relationship conversation. Kymara, you mentioned confusion. And then Brad, you mentioned how it's not our fault. And I know that those two things can often go hand in hand. The confusion of, is this my fault within that trauma? And so as we think about relationships, how has trauma impacted your relationships, whether they're romantic, platonic, professional? But I want to add, building on what Brad and Kymara said, with yourself, how has trauma affected these relationships?
In answering that question, I also want to tie back to the last one really quickly, because the quote that came to mind when you asked the question, how we work through it, is breathing through pain. And to directly answer that former question, one way I work through trauma often is like meditating. And sometimes from the tension that has been caused through depression, anxiety in my body, it will really hurt to breathe, like literally breath itself hurts. And to work through that, I have to literally breathe through the knots, breathe through the pain. And in that idea, there's this sense of accountability, which tied to the idea of relationships, taking accountability for oneself and how we heal and recover through things that were not our fault is something that is not linear, but is always still in motion, right? So I know for me, like, the only way through it is to work through it. And that involves being accountable in relationships with other people. Like, hey, I expect myself to keep on working for me, working to build and heal myself. I want the same thing in the people that are surrounding me. Like, I know one way this comes up a lot for me, I know personally, is with family. Trying to restructure my relationships with how I interact with a parent or someone very close, because trauma can really impact the ways in which we communicate with one another. And I know in my own journey, like, always being mindful of, like, this is how I want to be treated. This is how I want to now have this conversation. Or if something's triggering, finding a way to express that respectfully but firmly. Accountability just seems to tie a singular thread throughout not only the way life is lived, but the way I live that interpersonally with others. So that's one thing that definitely came up for me, breathing through the pain and the idea of being accountable, of working through it despite who's hurt you, especially if those people are still within your life, and how you wish to interact with them on that base, interact with them at all, if anything.
Yeah, that does sound a lot like there's some, or what I'm hearing, my interpretation is this resetting boundaries. It's almost like, what is Jay-Z has that quote, allow me to reintroduce myself to myself and to others. So thank you for that. And thank you, Jigga. Thank you, Hove. Others, on how has trauma impacted your relationships?
I want to share a traumatic experience that I had in college. So one night, I went out with, actually, it was a party that my friends threw, and I was at the door, like in the entrance, taking the money and everything. And my friends were at the party, and my boyfriend was there. Something happened, a fight broke out. Everybody got escorted out of the club, and the fight ensued, and my ex-boyfriend got jumped. It was very traumatic. I had to see everything. Tried to help him. Other friends were trying to help him. It was very chaotic. He was stabbed in multiple places. And a lot of things went down. Like the ambulance couldn't come down the street. We were in Manhattan, Lower East Side, and the streets were tight, and there was so much going on. We were in the streets, and so the ambulance couldn't come. And so obviously my ex-boyfriend, he didn't know all of this was happening. And so after he recovered, and we were talking, and I wanted to share, because I'm naturally like a close kind of person. I only have like 1 to 2 like close people that I really open up to and talk to. So I was talking to him, who I normally was talking to as the closest person in my life around that time. And as I was explaining to him how traumatic it was for me, I neglected to remember how traumatic it was for him. And I apologize. That's my son. You must have just heard me something.
Shout out to all the mamas, right? All the parents holding it down with our babies. Shout out to y'all.
So I didn't realize how traumatic it was for him, being on the side of the person who actually was the victim, who actually was hurt. And he told me, he's like, I don't want to hear what you went through, and I realized at that point that it was insensitive for me to do that. And I really should have gotten therapy myself, because what was happening is I was dealing with PTSD, and I was dealing with things that I needed to process and just, really talk to someone. And so I was able to do that. He never did. He was able to just say, that the streets are the streets, and, kind of keep it moving. But in that time, I realized that I need to make sure that I have someone that can support me mentally, someone, a professional. Sometimes your friends might not want to share in that trauma, especially if the person was a part of that traumatic experience.
Thinking about relationships, thank you for that share, because that was a nuanced recollection, and it really spoke to the complexity of the kinds of relationships we can have, and how they manifest, and how various people deal with trauma. And how one thing it made me think about is that oftentimes a traumatic event can be related to someone else's maybe direct traumatic event. And so thank you for sharing that. You mentioned therapy. And when we talk about relationships, I think that for some people, an important relationship is their therapist, psychotherapy. And just for the listeners and viewers, there is a difference between a psychiatrist and a therapist. For those of you that don't know, typically a psychiatrist is a licensed medical professional that's gone through med school, who often prescribes the medication that many people take to treat their mental health disorders, which is different than psychotherapy or talk therapy, in which one typically talks about their issues. Therapists, more often than not, do not have the agency or authority to prescribe medication. So these are two different kinds of relationships. And so my question is, do we think it's important to normalize therapy and psychiatric supports? I know some people like more holistic spiritual methods. Some people like more medical clinical methods. So what are our opinions, experiences when it comes to, do we think it's important to normalize therapy and psychiatric supports?
I think part of what mental health teaches you is about your limits in time. And there at certain times, there are emotional spaces you cannot afford to go. There are conversations that you can't afford to have. Sometimes there are people you can't help right now, because that will take you past your point. And so when I think about mental health, I see it as a journey, and I see support as an ensemble. I remember one time speaking to my psychiatrist, and I was recovering from a really difficult depression, and I was getting better, but I still wasn't feeling myself. And then I was having panic attacks on the train, and I started to tell her about it, and she spoke to me about how depression and anxiety often go together, and you want to treat both of them, because if one gets left untreated, they kind of stick around. But she said something to me that always stays with me. She said, you should not have to suffer like that. And that word suffer is, as weird as it might sound, it's a bridge, because when you really realize that, these different experiences that you're having, that you are suffering, and it's more easy for folks to see when it's something physical that's suffering. It's like, of course you're going to go to the doctor if someone slashes your hand and you can't stop the bleeding. But when it comes to what's going on up here, there's so many ways in which we deny it, we minimize it, and absolutely every support possible should be entertained if you are suffering. And that always includes the option of therapy, the optional of pharmaceutical intervention. We have to find what works for us. Period.
Amen.
If I can just, that was beautiful, Brad, you know, and it brought up so many things. One of the things that I'm thinking about is like how long it took me to actually want to try medication because of the stigma that I had around the idea, and even therapy, you know, like, so the question that's coming to me is like, how do, you know, have any of you ever dealt with that? Like, was it a challenge to allow yourself to be able to go to therapy and talk to a therapist, you know, about those conversations that sometimes we can't get into because they're traumatic? Well, what do we do with that energy that needs to be expelled if we're not talking to people about it, or if our friends can't carry that for us? You know, so I'm very interested to know, like, what are your thoughts as far as yourself and our community accepting medication, accepting therapy, and other sorts of supporting modalities for us to move through this trauma and mental illness in general?
I can speak to that a little bit in that, although, like I said, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 27, I had been hospitalized before that. So I had had instances in which the writing was on the wall that I was bipolar, but due to my lack of information and that no one was talking about it, I wasn't willing to accept the diagnosis initially, which led to, although I'd be prescribed medication, I wouldn't take it regularly because I felt fine and didn't think it was a problem. Then I was make excuses like maybe it's anger management. So it took me a good while to fully accept the diagnosis and the changes that I have to make in my life. But that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Also, just like I said, to bring awareness to these conversations and these things that people go through, because just not enough people in communities of color are talking about this and having these conversations. And I felt that if somebody had been there that was more on my level, like I had family members, like maybe older family members, but if I had someone maybe the same age as me or someone that looked more like me, be able to explain that they had gone through similar experiences, then I'd be more willing to accept the diagnosis, I think, initially.
Thank you. Thank you. The stigma. I also feel like I didn't know anybody. Not to put people on the spot, but Gabe, it made me think about how you mentioned you had a recent diagnosis with this. And I know for me personally, my diagnosis was quite some time ago, so I've lost that perspective a bit. And so I'm very interested as you hear these questions and responses. What is it like for you thinking about it, having a more recent diagnosis?
Yeah, I think it's a few things are like going through my mind at the same time right now. I think part of it too is thinking about how you know, mental illness runs through my family, right? My dad was bipolar, my brother is schizophrenic, my mother has depression, and you know, me and my oldest brother were like pretty much the last two to see a psychiatrist, right? Where for me, um, just taking some of the prescriptions for my anxiety and depression, I'm like, oh, like that's the difference. Like I normalized what I was experiencing so often that I forgot, you know, or not necessarily like I forgot, but like oh, like this pill that I just took brought my appetite back. This pill that I just took is helping me think more clearly. Okay, so it does work, you know? Like where my father didn't take his prescriptions, right? And so often, the question would run through my mind, like maybe dad would have been in our lives more often if he just took care of himself, right? If he like tasked himself with his own betterment, right, and his own treatment, where instead, he isolated himself a lot, and also was super manipulative and abusive towards the family. And I've seen how uh, the ways that he's moved and other members of my family have moved has affected me in my relationships recently, and then like allowing me to look back over like professional, platonic, and like other relationships. Like, oh wow, like I was tripping then. Oh wow, like I really wasn't considering that other person. Oh wow, that was type narcissistic of me. Wow, okay, but now like having the language for those things is allowing me to like think about how it can be better, right? So I'm constantly always thinking about um, you know uh, back to that question from before, like how do we cope, right? And I think and what do we think of trauma, right? It's like I think of trauma as like like an amalgamation of hurtful experiences that we can like confuse our identities for, right? And lose sight of who we really are, and lose sight of our abilities and our powers and our strengths and our value when we're only identifying with what hurts, right? Um, and just thinking about how it's spaces like this where people are able to feel like you know um, healing is possible, where redemption or the ability to not take control, right? I don't know. Control is like a weird word for me now. Just because I've been reading all about love, right? So like how do I align myself with the ways in which I believe I should be living my life, right? For the betterment of myself and those around me. So yeah.
That's a deep reflective practice. And I'm so appreciative of you sharing that. You put words to, I think, something I strive for. So wow, that was an amazing response. So thinking about that reflective practice and thinking of our identities as artists in some regard, I want to dive into our artistry a bit and how our mental illnesses, our various illnesses, affects that. A real quick stat: Dr. K. Redfield Jameson, who I believe heads up the mental health department at UCLA, some California school, but she has a book called "Touched by Fire: The Artistic Temperament," and she explores artists of various ilks throughout time and how it seems to have a higher percentage of mental health disorders amongst artists. We know that Demi Lovato, Britney Spears, Carrie Fisher, Chris Brown, Kanye West, a number of artists have various mental health disorders, but their output is legendary. We know that as well. And so I'd like to ask you all, what role or how has mental health factored into your artistic practice? Is it for healing, or is it just for inspiration, or do you tune it out? Do you not think about it at all? And anyone can answer, but I do see a raised hand.
I definitely want to speak to that because since my teenage years, I had came up with the phrase, well, really question of asking myself, am I mad because I'm an artist, or am I an artist because I'm mad? And it's actually even more ironic because I just made a painting with that quote like 3 days ago. But it's something that has been a question within my artistry in the sense of trying to just further understand myself. So the process of creating art in
the format of my for my healing, has been a process of not only searching for understanding of my own self, but then also creating, in a sense, a persona of someone that does understand. Because I know in my personal journey, I've always felt misunderstood. And in creation, when I create, it's almost like it's not me. It's like it's this separate entity within myself that's just needing to come out. And sometimes that entity helps me just understand where I'm at. But other times it's just a voice saying, it's okay. There's someone out there that believes that understands where you're at, even if right now that other person or other thing is something you can't quite understand. There is still something out there polling for you, rooting for you, or just really simply finding its own definition, just like you're finding your own definition every day. So those are two big reasons as to why I feel like the arts have always held a pull for me, because in a world where I would feel so isolated and so alone, there was always that extra voice that was still just like, I got you.
Almost the arts being a companion, almost. They're just with you.
Yeah, it's like Kymara, she is someone deeper than the girl that my mother birthed and named. Like, she is almost like this evangelical creation that came from the necessity of needing something within my life to feel heard. And there would be times where literally I would write and put the name Kymara, and I would read it back in, like, just as my other self, I would like to say. And it literally was two different people, right? Like, in terms of like writing poetry, for instance, it was two different people, yet I created it, right? It's my body, it's my vessel making this creation, yet my art felt like an extension of something deeper. So it was just always amazing, and still is amazing, that when I feel like there's nothing that can ever understand where I'm truly at, there's something within that's willing to come step out through me, through my pen, through my paintbrush, through whatever, I guess, utensil I wish to demonstrate at that moment. And I am found once again. Even if I still feel very lost. I'm sorry, I'm still not eloquent today, but hopefully y'all feel me where I'm coming from with that.
Feel you.
With that, I want to circle back to one of our previous questions about normalizing therapy and psychiatry and whether or not we think it's important. Yes, that is the answer. I think that therapy in particular is important for those of us with and those of us without diagnoses, because a lot of our stresses are environmental more than they are biological. And so I think all of us really deserve that kind, neutral ear to really hear us through some of our traumas, our pains, our hurts, our sorrows. And I would say that alongside this medical, clinical view and perspective of mental illness or just mental health, I think it's really important that we tap into our cultural and spiritual practices of our ancestral lineage. And when we think about our art, oftentimes they say, as a spoken word artist, spoken word is prophecy, right? You think about the griot, right? Who wasn't just a historical worker, he or she, they were a cultural worker. Artists are healers, right? And so I think of Kara Page, the activist or artivist, if you will, art being her writing, who coined the term healing justice. And I actually quoted something that she recently said in a podcast, and she talks about cultural work being to remember the practices, the traditions, and medicines of our ancestral lineage, right? So to me, we oftentimes seek for understanding in our textbooks, but not all understanding will be bound in page with a pen or ink, right? A lot of that understanding, that knowing, that truth, the analysis of truth is in our cellular memory, right? And the same way we cannot separate the body from mind, We cannot separate culture and context from our mental health or from the mental health industrial complex, right? So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Kymara.
You're welcome. And actually, because that brings to mind for me, first of all, I'm holding an obsidian and a pyrite in my hand right now. You feel me? And I am a stalwart advocate of psychiatry and therapeutic services. However, I'm also in my own personal, I guess, hopeless romantic or hopeless patient journey with them, because unfortunately, in my experience, a great deal of my traumas have come from the Office of Mental Health. Even currently, in my current care team is everything but for me, and yet I still believe in the power of therapy services because, as Kymani already mentioned, we all need someone to have an ear. You know, we all deserve that person to hear us and to listen to us. And I think right now it's really crucial to find workers that are Black, have dealt with some type of trauma themselves and are either in recovery from it or have recovered from it, and just people that truly care. Because in my experience, I've just had people who I guess felt like, oh, yeah, you know, I'm good at listening. Why not take this job? And they are not suited for it in the slightest. And, you know, that's not to discourage anybody from pursuing a dream, but that is to really just embolden the fact that if you want to be that person for somebody that can be, if you want to be the person someone can share their heart and their pain to, you need to be able to make sure you're a vessel prepared for that. Because we all, like, this is not a game. We are all alive. We're all struggling in our own different ways. And you know, I've heard things from doctors no patient should ever hear. Things from, well, you're the one that did this to yourself. So if you didn't feel, you know, like if you didn't want to be here, you shouldn't have done this. Or, you know, just being invalidated, being put down. But I still believe, because I'll never take for granted the power within that one person that does it right. And to close on that idea, recently I actually called a hotline because, as I just mentioned, I didn't feel comfortable with my therapist or in calling my case manager and, you know, people on my current clinical team. I called the hotline actually because I actually wasn't feeling suicidal. I called on one of the suicide hotlines, but I wasn't feeling suicidal. I was just a little down. And I actually wanted someone to just hear me sing a song because one of my artistry's music, I have strong anxiety from it due to trauma in my past. And it's funny, that one phone call turned from me just kind of feeling bashful and want to sing to somebody into me crying and really healing because somebody was listening to me. And I let out everything I should have let my therapist know for weeks. But because I felt that person's soul and that person's compassion compared to who's on my team now, that made all the difference. Because of me calling that hotline, I killed it in a performance the next day. And I never would have believed in myself if I did not have the opportunity of someone out there saying, I want to hear you and believe in you too. So especially if you are a mental health professional watching this, you better get your game up. Reflect on yourself. Get yourself a therapist. Because I'm tired of seeing people like me in my position, myself and others, have to deal with being hurt by the same people that are supposed to help them. This is not a game. Thank you.
Oh, snap to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. We do have about 5 minutes, actually. This has been, wow. I definitely have a lot to think about and consider and reflect upon in my own self-care practice. So thank you, panelists, and of course, thank you, Kymani. But we will have departing words from each of the panelists. We would love that. However, we do have a spoken word performance from Brad. And so I do want to pass that over so we can hear the poetry in motion, quite literally.
Thank you. This was written as inspiration. Here, where we must be everything, We have learned for us, hate is not a sustainable fuel source. Here, for sure, we have known a kind of hate that would wish us no room. Our survival here has always meant making light and fire and breath by alternative means. Remember, we are the organic ones. Love will cause you to organize a waterfall in the pit of hell. Love will cause you to lay siege to a freedom that will not let you go, regardless who, how they try to take it, now more than ever. Love will marshal the fiercest, sustained defense. And maybe this is our service. Name yourself. Claim yourself. Place no other gods before you. Everything is joy. Everything is I made it. Everything is I must still try. Everything is I show up. Everything is I show out. Everything is we come back. Everything is we keep on coming. Everything is God. Everything is Oshun. Everything is Gemynii. Everything is a manifest intent. Everything is all of me belongs here. Everything is we found a way. Everything is a way was found. Everything integrates. Everything heals. Everything takes time. Everything is one human holding another. Everything makes room in the dark. Everything makes room in the light. Everything.
I had to unmute and clap for that. The quote I'm going to have every day is, hate is not a sustainable resource. Wow, that knocked me over. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your artistry with us. So we do have a call to action. Of course, we've talked about things that need to be done in our own personal life. We've talked about things that we see as issues, the stigmas, the challenges of dealing with mental health disorders. So there are just a few things I want to share. And of course, you can reach out to us for more resources, and feel free, and we're encouraging you to share resources with us as well. There's Set Boundaries, Find Peace at www.nedratawwab.com. Kymani, you might have to say that properly. We have the at Black Girls Can Heal. I believe that's, thank you. We also have an event coming up soon, Heart Space, holding space for educational professionals, presented by Dean. And that's going to be happening Wednesday, August 25th, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And that is Eastern time zone. That is an Eastern time zone. And there's an Eventbrite for that. And so I would just like to offer the floor to a closing comment. Well, Kymani, it looks like we're right at time, and I know this closes, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, but I really want to make sure we give everybody an opportunity to share something, you know, to close us out in community. So
I didn't know if the room.
Oh no, we're open. We're good. We're going to be here after you all head out. So you all go ahead, do what you do. No, we have more than enough time. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Well, this, I mean, obviously everyone here has a wealth of knowledge to contribute from a personal standpoint and just from learning about their various challenges. And so I just want to offer the floor to no one in particular with some closing reflections, comments, or even offerings of a question for us to all consider as we move forward beyond this space. So the floor is everyone's.
Hey everybody, this is Kay again. Everything that I heard was phenomenal, and I have so much going through my head right now. But the thing that's standing out the most is that question: should we normalize therapy and medications? And I want to agree with Kymani, right? Like, yes. And I'm also saying with caution and with culturally relevant guidance as well, because I myself, like a lot of us here, have experienced trauma from the medical industry, you know, and it's important. And also, as far as using the arts as our cultural and spiritual healing, in addition to whatever therapies we may use as well, because that gives us the safe space Our community may not judge us on things that the medical community might judge us on. Like one of the reasons why I didn't go into therapy right away was because one of their first questions is like, do you hear things? Or I'm a part musician. I hear little ditties and little, things all the time, Kymara talked about, it's like a voice just comes and says this thing, like that's, as artists, we speak that language, but when you take that language into therapy, sometimes it's taken out the wrong way, just real quick, I have a friend who was just talking to their therapist about how angry they were at their partner and said, man, I feel like killing my partner, oh, I just feel like killing her, They locked her up, they hospitalized her and forced her into being treated just because of that statement. Whereas culturally, y'all know, if I say, I'm doing this art to keep me from killing people, it's not literal. I'm just expressing my emotions, little things like that will keep marginalized people, Black people, brown people away from therapy. But I just want to again say the same thing that we've all been saying, don't exclude yourself from therapy or medication because of the bad experiences that some of us may have shared or you may have experienced. There are the good therapists out there. There is the right medication for you out there, and it really does help once you find the right thing and find people, find community, and have those conversations to try to avoid the traps that we got ourselves into. And that's where I'm gonna leave it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've had an experience like that as well. I was talking with someone, they asked me, do you feel suicidal? And I remember having to say to them, well, do you want me to give you the answer that's going to let me go back to work, or do you want me to give you the real answer? And so that made me think about that a great deal, how I think most people who deal with mental health disorders know what you can and can't say if you want to leave the hospital that day. Others, closing remarks, closing comments. Thank you, Kay.
I just want to leave with everyone out there in the interwebs. How do you check in with yourself? That's the closing question. How do you check in with yourself? And I want people to explore that question every day. The answer can look like anything. For me right now, that's affirmations, making journaling a priority. I even created my own ADL chart, which if anyone who may not be familiar, that's an activities of daily living chart. Often in hospitals, they'll give you one which will involve like eating, taking a shower, things like that. But I put mine for creative and spiritual work and some physical and mental work as well, because, just making it really personal to me and things that I feel like will help me heal. Everybody, I feel, definitely needs to just asking themselves on a daily basis, how did I check in with myself and how can I continue to? And shoot, real quick, I'm gonna just show y'all my ADL chart because I'm proud of it. Because it took me a long time to even get to this part in my life to just feel like I want to do something like this, to care about my healing enough to create something of this caliber. Because keeping, again, back to accountability, keeping yourself accountable, having some sort of routine to just keep yourself together every day is important. Make yourself a priority because you matter. And the only way to show yourself you matter is by checking in with yourself, like you would a friend or your spiritual team or whatever you have that you know that you love dearly. Love yourself like you can love them. Love yourself deeper than that. And remember to ask yourself, what do I need? Just check on it.
Thank you. Thank you for that question for all of us. PJ, you unmuted because you were getting ready to say something. I want to make sure you get in there.
Okay, I can say what I was going to say before. I can answer that question. Which do you prefer?
Up to you.
Okay. I wanted to share a shoe on the other foot because I was a case manager in the past, and it was traumatic for me. Going into, just being, I was right out of college. It was the first time I was actually doing that type of healing work, right? Being present to people and really wanting to address their needs. And there's a lot of bureaucracy and everything when you work through nonprofits and you're a case manager on that level. And they don't give you, as many tools and things that you need. And I think one of them is the mental health support to even be a case manager, because I struggled. Like the first 6 months, it affected my relationship, my relationship with my boyfriend at the time. I couldn't even be intimate with him because of hearing the stories of my clients. I was traumatized by it. And when I spoke to my boss, it was just kind of like, okay, take a few days off, but it wasn't anything more in depth than that. And that's why there's such a high turnover. Like you said, if you're not prepared as a vessel to take these things on. And so what I realized is, I didn't say, I did it for about a year and a half, but after the first 6 months, I was genuinely wanting to be in a space to assist my clients. So I checked in with myself mentally and said, okay, what can I do to help me through this process? And I said, well, instead of taking their energy with me when I leave them, maybe I should leave some of my energy there with them. And because I'm a spiritual person and I know how to do those kinds of things, I know how energy works, I was able to do that, and it made all the difference. It actually made me feel better knowing that I was leaving positive energy with them there, and made me feel secure. Like, okay, that'll hold them over until I get back to them next week. So it's a two-way street. Not every person, like you said, is really capable to be a vessel on that level, and there is not enough mental, emotional support for case managers. That's all I just wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
I
I'm just gonna say this one thing, and I'm gonna give you the mic, Emuche. That's real. There's something that goes around often. Who heals the healers, right? Who heals the healers? That's it. Go ahead, Emuche.
I just wanted to say, in addition to something Kymani had said earlier about how we're all affected by our environment, almost in many more cases than our biology, and how for that reason, normalizing therapy is, I think, something that many people who aren't diagnosed with mental illnesses should still also consider. But we've spoken about seeing therapists or having caseworkers that maybe aren't ready to take on what you're ready to lay down. And I think that's why it's important to be open to finding a good therapist, because I know you don't want just someone who's going to listen to you. You want someone that's going to help be proactive in helping you find answers or a routine, or just being more proactive in their suggestions of how to help you and how you can help yourself. So that's just something I want to add.
Thank you. We still have time, of course, so if others want to share before we close, you're not only welcome, you're encouraged. And we know you have much to offer. And if not, that's cool too.
Part of the whole discussion and things everyone shared brings me back to integration. And I think part of our journey here is like collecting ourselves. And sometimes, often with trauma, parts of us have to split off, because as a people, there are kinds of trauma that are bigger than all of us. As individuals, that happens as well. And I think that's where the cultural and spiritual systems really, really matter. It's like a language that is bigger than diagnoses and what we label things. And even in our creativity, if you're doing this work, you touch what's divine in your work, and when you touch it. And there's ways that it humbles you, and there's ways that you can't necessarily explain to many people. And even in our health, there are dimensions that we touch that people don't touch. There's things that we feel on levels that not many people, they don't get to touch those things. And some of them it makes you vulnerable, you know. And I think for me, I've chosen to let my vulnerability be my strength. And everything takes time. This is a necessarily complex and complicated road. And the journey, showing up for the journey, sometimes is the only thing that we can do. And certainly it's always the best thing.
And thank you, Brad, everyone. Yeah, I just feel like I'm mad quiet, but that's because I'm like really listening. um, but something that I'm also thinking about uh, with all of us here, also as like artists as well, and advocates for mental health and Black folk, right? Um, I'm thinking about this poet, Federico Garcia Lorca, who is a Spanish poet, right? And he like kind of coined this phrase about duende, right? Where here in America and most parts of the world, right? Christianity, like artists will kind of talk about energy coming from above, from the heavens. I don't know, like something like that, right? But duende being an energy that comes from the earth and moves up through your feet and through your body from the ground, right? And he thought he knew what duende was until he came to Harlem. You know what I'm saying? And then he started hearing jazz and black music, and then he referred to duende as el canto negro, right? The black song, right?
Wow.
And there's a bunch of different ways to describe darkness, like shadiness, like there's a whole, he said negro, right? You know what I'm saying? So I think as artists as well, and as Black folk, we have to remember um, our value, right? And along with our value, how our breath is contributing to that black song, that resonates through the world, that connects us through the ether of diaspora and our ancestors and time, right? We are timeless, right? Um, and I believe that when it comes to these kinds of spaces, when it comes to opportunities for us to just breathe together, we give each other a reason to sing and dance. We give each other a reason to choose life, right? And to know that, um, it's. I'm also thinking about Audre Lorde now too. There's this poem, "A Litany for Survival," and the end of it goes, "And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." So, yeah, y'all. Let's just keep doing this. Let's keep making this happen. Keep holding space for ourselves and each other, and you know, uh, letting each other know what was once something we maybe had once felt shamed about. There is also power in, when we claim it, when we own it, and we don't let people use it against us. Right? So, yeah.
Thank you for that offering, that artistic offering 2 times. I mean, Duende, I wrote that down. I just really want to thank all the panelists. I mean, not only just thank you, I feel really deeply connected, even though we don't really know each other. And I think that just speaks to the fact that through our blackness, through our struggles, and through our triumphs, through our beauty, we are connected. And I think I'm Gabriel. I'm just thank you for sharing that, because sometimes I think with mental health, it does become a very individualistic journey because it's a very personal experience. And just to have that reminder that we are connected, and that, as Kymani said, this does not exist in a vacuum, that the context matters, and this earth matters, and where we live and how we navigate the world and our relationships, this connectivity as a source of strength. I think, Brad, you said it best, that your vulnerability is a strength, is a superpower. It's not a weakness. So thank you all for your words, your thoughts, and your vibes. I love good vibes, and the vibes here are very good, even through this virtual platform. To close, I'm actually going to hand it back over to Kymani to take us out for the evening. Thank you.
What an excellent conversation. Victor, thank you for leading us through this discussion. It was so very necessary. For those of you watching, this has been healing for us. We pray, we know this has been healing for so many of you. So thank you for watching. And we've already thanked all of the panelists, except for one, and that's Gemynii. And I wanted to give you some insight into why Gemynii had to step away. And this is for full transparency, because it's fully important that when we need to take time away for ourselves, that we do so, regardless of the circumstance, right? Because our health is more important than anything else. So Gemynii, a special thanks to you for showing up and stepping away when you knew you needed to, right? And then just shout out to all of y'all. Shout out to Kay, shout out to Victor, shout out to Brad, shout out to Kymara, shout out to Emuche, shout out to Pajani, shout out to Gabriel. Shout out to you all for showing up for yourselves, not for me, for yourselves. I appreciate you so deeply. And to everyone watching, thank you for helping us co-create communities of collective care and consciousness. This conversation will be available on YouTube for future viewing, and you can find it on the interwebs wherever you are. Have a beautiful evening. Take care.
Bye.